Not great,
Oh, well,
honestly.
that assumes that people who are watching. We're soon. Hang on. We'll be with you. Okay, this is Al. I hope the audio feed is coming out to the world. And Anna's hiding her head in shame.
Ready.
I'm Al Philreese. We are at the Kelly Writers House. It's fabulous. We are doing a test run dress rehearsal of the new Webcast tech system here at the Kelly Writers House in our new Arts Cafe. And what we thought we would do is try it out and get people to hang out with us. And so we tried a couple of different things today. One is that you see in the Hangouts, you see community TAs, not the usual TAs. And I'll introduce them in a second. Here at the table, we have Lily Applebaum. Hello, Lily. Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. And Anna.
Yo, what up?
Hello, Anna. You have to get closer to the mic, don't you think?
Yo, what up?
Okay. And I'm introducing to the ModPo community for the first time the amazing Claire Adams.
Hi, everyone.
Claire is our intern. She's a student at Temple University studying education, very interested in kind of progressive and experimental pedagogies.
Yep, that's it. That's really
Did I nail that?
You got it.
Okay, so Claire, we already know Claire to be fantastic. She's going to be helping us out. And our plan today is to talk about 3 poems. So I'm going to give out, before I introduce the CTAs, I'm going to give out the number. Zach, 610. 616. So the number is 610-616-3208, and you can call that anytime. But I got to warn you, this is not the usual call-in where you're just asking random questions that are questions on your mind. We're going to be talking about one poem at a time. We're going to ask you to call in about that particular poem if you have a thought. We also would like you to post to Twitter using the hashtag ModPoLive or ModOlive, right? And Ray is tweeting, but we already know Ray's there. So we're going to be basically refreshing that feed and seeing what you have to say about the poems. And also we have a special thread in the forums, the ModPo forums, set up for this discussion. And it's easy to find. If you just go to the discussion forums, you'll see that this one is pinned. It says, please post comments, questions before, during the June 6th live webcast. So please post there. And like I say again, you can call or you can post to Facebook. Is anybody looking at Facebook?
I can pull it up.
That would be great. It's
Yeah.
the ModPo group. I don't know if you remember. Okay, so let me introduce the CTAs and we'll get started with one of our poems. First of all, we have Jeremy Dickinson, who's here from Wales.
Well,
Hey,
hello, buddy.
say hi to the people.
Hi.
Jeremy is so fantastic. He's a poet. He's a bookmaker. And sometimes his poeting, is that what you say?
Sure.
Poeting.
Oh,
Oh, he's got one of them handy. Yeah. Sometimes his poetizing and his bookmaking are exactly the same activity, which is why we love him so much, because that kind of activity fascinates us. Thank you, Jeremy, for hanging out with us. What
Thank
time
you.
is it there? You're about 6 hours ahead, I would say.
5 hours, so it's just gone 5 o'clock.
Okay, it's drink o'clock. Break out the wine. Now, speaking of drink o'clock, in Paris, it's always drink o'clock. And we, in fact, Irene, Tora, Mohadeno, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing all 3 of those names. Actually, probably two of them.
Yes.
Is a wonder. I am? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you told me last week that I could say Irene.
Yeah, Irene is perfectly fine.
Okay, so I got 2 out of 3. Anyway, Irene and I was in Paris, and Irene was very, very kind to show Jane and me around, and we had such a good afternoon together. And she gave me, Zach, a copy of her book. Zach,
there it is.
there it goes.
I mean, you could also have lowered the book.
I-
Than the other way to do that.
They're learning, guys. Oh, it's out of focus, though, Zach. Zach is learning. There it is. The Conquest of Space. Irene, is that fair? The Conquest of Space? Is
Yeah,
that the translation?
It is La Conquista del Espacio. Right.
So Irene is a Spanish language poet, except that in this book there's also French poems and one English poem. So thank you, Irene, for joining us. Kelly Lou is from Palo Alto via Penn, where she's a student, but today she's in Florence, Italy. Hi, Kelly.
Hello.
Tell us about 3 things you've seen in Florence so far.
I saw the Duomo, which is the dome in the church, and it's really magnificent. And then a lot of street musicians, which really make up the atmosphere. And today I'm in this writing class, and I went up to this church that overlooks all Florence, so I got to see a panoramic view of the city.
That's nice. And you're there as a part of a study group, or you're just on vacation?
I'm taking classes at a university.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today. And Kelly has the distinction is that, well, she has many distinctions, but one is that she joined ModPo before she matriculated at Penn. In fact, there was a connection between her interest in ModPo and deciding to come to Penn. So yay for ModPo and Kelly. Mandana Chaffa is in New York. Hello, Mandana.
Hi, Al. Hi, everyone.
I think, you and Ray probably vie for the most what name recognition. We're in political season here. For the highest name recognition around. You've both been around a long time. And we just love the heck out of you. Thank you, Mandana.
Thank you so much, Al.
It's good to see you. And Magdelena is here from Warsaw, Poland. Hello, Magdelena.
Yes.
Hi. How are you?
Hi.
It's good to see you. We've seen
Yeah,
you
it's good
twice.
to
When
see
we
you all
went to
too.
London, you traveled from Warsaw to London. We went to Montreal. You traveled
Yeah.
from Warsaw to Montreal. Anna, any speculation on why she would do such a thing?
Because she's so awesome.
She is awesome.
I mean,
She's
and
great.
because they have really great bagels in Montreal, which is now all I can make.
You think she came to Montreal for the bagels?
I mean,
Okay.
that's why I went.
All right. Well, we'll ask her. Magdalena, did you come to Montreal for the bagels?
Well, it is one of the things I love about Montreal, but in a way, I wanted to see the cities through the tree, and that did happen. So, and I got to meet Canadian ModPo people. That was really
That
wonderful.
was great.
Yeah. Yeah, Colleen Knight is watching today because we got a tweet from her. And finally, Ray Maxwell. Hello, Ray, who's joining us from Washington, D.C.
Hello, I'm here, Washington, D.C.
How are you? Washington is calling in.
I'm good. I'm on my lunch break, and I have reference desk duty at 1, so I'm going to have to tear
Okay.
away.
Okay.
But I'm here for an hour.
Okay, good. Very good. Well, I just want to do a quick show and tell, and then we're going to get to our first poem. The first poem is going to be, which one, Anna?
Let's do the Eigner first.
Wow, really? Okay, we're going to do the Larry Eigner poem, which I will recite. I will read. There is no recording of Larry reading that poem. We only have a few recordings of him. But before that, some show and tell. So I already showed you Irene's book, The Conquest of Space. And I also wanted to show Anthony Watkins' new book, The Lost Season, which is very influenced by ModPo. Congratulations to Anthony. He's busy, had some kind of inspection down there in Florida, and he's going to join this later by watching the recording. Sophia Naz has a new book, and it's called Date Palms. And Sophia was here not too long ago in April, and we had such a great time with her.
We did.
So I bet she's watching today, too, from out there north of San Francisco. And finally, Alana Shaw, who is a, regular. Alana Shaw was thrilled to find that Filling Station accepted a couple of her poems. And I'm going to challenge you here. Okay, so this is weird-ass poetry. Look at the format. And Alana just went way out there. This is not the kind of poetry that she's been used to writing. And she credits the influence of ModPo. So congratulations to Alana for breaking in to this magazine, Filling Station, issue 71. Okay, I'm going to read the Eigner poem, and then we're going to collaboratively close read it. And I don't know if we've got action. Claire, are you seeing anything in Twitter?
Not yet.
No, there is one thing.
It's like saying I'm here, but nothing.
That's good. And there's also one
There is a post on there.
post. So, okay. So people who are in the forums or in Twitter, we're going to be focusing on the Eigner. So here we go. I'm going to read it, and then we'll talk about it. And I'm going to ask Kelly and Irene just to start us off with any observation that you have about this poem, any at all. It goes like this. Sorry to turn silent, such time that does it, a river over something, grass and some stones. I want to continue. And it's lineated this way, and I hope that everybody has a copy because we've sent links out quite a lot the last few days. Okay, Kelly, what's your first thought as you read it?
The first thing that strikes me is the way the title is spaced, because like the SORY are like there's like extra space between each letter, which like with like my first impression of poem, there's a lot of sense of like gaining, trying to have voice or not having voice, and then it almost seems like the sorry is like an attempt to like create voice or like enunciating each like letter on the page.
Wow.
So that's the spacing is
Great
what gets
start.
me.
And also that sorry is a hesitant sorry because it sort of comes out in a difficult way. Yeah. And before we turn to Irene, Anna, what is it like to enter a conversation of any kind with the word sorry?
Do it all the time.
We do, don't we? And what does it mean?
It's an apology for like your very presence or your very like intrusion. Sometimes it's like a pardon me, I need to interrupt you for a second because I have to tell you this important thing. Sometimes it's like this weird apology thing we do, like apologizing for even speaking when like you have just as much of a right to speak or be in that conversation as anybody else. But people so often feel the need to apologize for just like being a person.
It can be used ironically. I hope nobody here does it ironically, but it's pretty rude to do.
Yeah.
It. Sorry, like what you're saying is nonsense, and
it's
I
like
really
saying like no offense, but
yeah. But I don't think that Larry Eigner's using it that way.
No.
Irene, what is your first thought about this?
Yeah, I will take not the first one, but the first word, but the last one maybe, because it's very interesting to me to end the poem with this. I want to continue and continue specifically, like it's the end, but the intention is to continue. So it's like there's silence, but somehow the word and the poem is still there. So yeah, it's probably linked with this, what Kelly said, like this title where we don't know if we want to have silence or a voice, we want to end or we want to continue. There's like everything in there.
Yeah.
That's what struck me.
That's terrific. What a great point. I want to continue, Lily, it's not a new thing to end a poem with a kind of continuation. But let's say what it means to do such a thing in a poem.
Well, you, when you said before, like sometimes starting a conversation with sorry can be ironic, and then it can be rude, but I think it can also be ironic in a non-rude way, because if you say sorry, that usually means I'm going to stop what I'm doing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, sorry, and I won't do it again, or like, sorry, I made a mistake, and the implication, like, then it won't continue. But like, there is irony here, but I just don't think that it's like mean irony or like funny irony. It's just an irony of like the opposite things being put together. So like the end being continue, like Irene said, or beginning with sorry, which should sort of be an ending. So, there's a cyclical energy to it. There's also, because of the formatting, I find it very haunting. Like I want to continue like a ghost or something like that.
Yeah. I want to turn to Jeremy and Ray to say something about what happens after sorry, because sorry doesn't stand alone. Really, grammatically, what the speaker is sorry about is having turned silent, right? So I guess Jeremy, I'll start with you. Just in normal social everyday interaction, what would that mean? I mean, if somebody came up to you and said to you, Jeremy, I'm sorry, I went silent there. What does that usually mean?
Kind of implies they're not happy, something's happened. Perhaps it's been a conversation that suddenly stopped, an argument,
Yeah,
not having the right words to continue.
right. So a kind of an awkwardness. Someone is apologizing for not
Awkward.
for breaking off the conversation or something like that.
Well, you can, but also it's also rather passive aggressive, isn't it? It's kind of like, sorry, but listen to me,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah,
It's and especially that drawn out sorry. It's like sorry, It's like a real kind of plea to listen, really.
yeah. Well, before we turn to Ray on this, we'll just throw in the biographical fact that I think everybody knows about the amazing Larry Eigner. Complications in birth, maybe, and also a congenital condition, which they described as cerebral palsy, but it was kind of a general diagnosis, general description, really, of his incapacity. Great limitations in mobility for Larry. In the end, he was able to, I think his parents bought him a typewriter, and he was able, in the end, to use one finger of one hand to type. He got around with great difficulty. He lived in Massachusetts for years and then daringly moved out to live independently in San Francisco and became, at the end of his life, at the end of his career, a great senior mentor pal of so many of the young poets who were coming up, including almost all of the language poets who were out there. Sorry, the way it's figured here, is kind of the way Larry sounded. And in fact, the lineation also, in a way, is so Larry Eigner. This is not a very loquacious poet like Ezra Pound, who could just talk forever and talk lucidly, well, not lucidly, but could talk straight through, and then do the cantos in this kind of pretend halting thing. For Larry, this was about the space bar, the tab bar, and hammering at words, chiseling. So with that information, Ray, would you just sort of riff a little bit on whether you see disability at all, immobility at all in the way this poem says what it says? It's a tough question, Ray.
Sure. No, I was thinking about the typewriter before you gave that information. I didn't realize that was the case. But as I looked at the poem, at the structure of the poem, I considered that he typed sorry with spaces between each letter. Then he hit line return. Then he hit an indent or a tab. Then he hit a space because it's not lined up. And he proceeds with the reason why he's sorry, to turn silent. But then there's another space. It's almost as if there's more to say, but he's not going to give it to us just yet.
Yeah.
Then the next line, there's space between the words as well.
Yeah.
So the structure of the poem is definitely a function of the mechanics of typing this particular poem, without even knowing that he was confined to, or that he used a typewriter with one finger. You can see a kind of haltiness in the way he kind of spat the words out.
Yes, that's really great. So what I want to do is repeat the phone number and also ask Claire if there's some people who are asking some questions. And then I want to turn to Magdelena and Manadana to try to figure out how we make the transition from the apology for silence or the interruption of what might have been an ongoing conversation to the natural description, which we get in the second part. If you put your hand over the top and your finger over the last line, you get a kind of pure imagist poem in a way. Observation, a river over something, grass and some stones. This is so Eigner, so I'm curious to know what the two of you think. And now, Claire, what do we have going on, Claire?
So there's a few people tweeting, not many questions, but there are comments.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's CA who I think you said was Colleen Knight.
Yeah,
right?
Colleen Knight.
She said, when you don't see someone for a while, for whatever reason, and then you come back to them and the friendship continues. This is Larry Eigner's Sorry to Turn Silent.
Thank you, Colleen. That's great.
And then there was Willard Strindberg.
Yeah, Willard
Left
Strindberg.
a comment about this poem on the Coursera forum, and he was talking about how the such time, that line, it speaks of the silent time. There is then a pause wherein the poet considers it and finds it. That does it. It is good. Then greater pause, then he explains where he is. He is both looking at and being the river. One can feel the sun over his back and or through him, as water the grass laid back around and over the gray stones. It is fresh and bright. It is a place he likes, and he wishes to stay there.
Wow. So Willard does a whole reading of the poem by accounting for the transition from the interruption into the place that the speaker is. That's really helpful. Is there another one you want to quote? Or
There was one more. Stephanie Nelson Rankin. She said, "A poem to those we leave when we die. We mostly never do want to die." Talking about this poem.
Got another great tweet from Dina. Sorry.
Dina Perot?
Yeah. Sorry, in quotes, to turn silent, in quotes. Seems like a wandering away from the conversation, getting lost in the moment, attention turned to the natural setting. Another good comment.
Yeah.
Oh, and Sanjeev. Hi, Sanjeev.
Yeah, just happened.
Sanjeev.
Sanjeev.
Lily, what possible advantage could be derived from a person turning silent and focusing on something else? You know, in a social, there's an implied social relationship because the speaker is talking to someone, even if it's just the readers, but more likely some, assumed person. But we think of that as a negative thing. Oh, you weren't paying attention. But what possible positive thing could that be? Could that signal?
There's a lot, I think we do a lot of praising of indirectness in ModPo, which is ironic. I don't know why we're using that word a lot. I mean me, are using that word a lot today. But it's ironic that such a short poem can have indirectness because it's so short. But if your goal is to get from A to B in a poem, sometimes it's more expedient to soft focus on B, but wander around until you eventually get there. Just because you were missing details, you were turning to poetry to communicate something that couldn't be communicated with more conventional, like direct linear conversation. Poets could have a lot of reasons for wanting to wander a bit more and turn silent and turn their focus away from the main thing that they're supposed to be looking at.
Thank you. The number is
We have
6.
someone on the phone, Al, actually, right now.
Do we have somebody on the phone? Great. Chris, who is on the phone?
Hey.
Hi, Chris.
Hey. Glad to be here today. We have Philip Drexler
Called
calling
it.
today.
Okay, bring Phil up. Hello, Phil. Hello,
There he
Phil.
Hey, how you doing, Al?
Good.
This one's right up my alley.
105 degrees there in Texas? What's that?
I did not know that Larry was disabled, so I have quite a bit to say about this now.
Well, we're going
I'm glad to know it, but I'm glad that I didn't know it.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I simply think that this is a poem about someone who needs a sabbatical. And people with and without disabilities are equally in need of a sabbatical at times in order to recharge their batteries and then go back to continue doing whatever it is that they need to continue after having enjoyed that sabbatical.
That's a really...
And I think that's exactly what he's describing here.
Phil, that's a really good reading. Let me see if I can summarize. Let me see if I can paraphrase the reading back to you. Tell me if I get it right. We get the exhaustion of the effort to communicate at the beginning. Then we get this kind of dreamt of break from it, like somebody saying, God, just give me a river. Give me some grass and some stones. And then, like once I have that, I want to get back to the work, which is the struggle to communicate. That's snaps for Phil. That was That was really good. Phil, you just blew us away with this thing. I want to turn to.
Well, I sent you a video of the old Three Dog Night song, and in the chorus, that's exactly what they also say. I got to get away, I got to get to a river, and then I'll find something worth remembering. Remembering means that you got to bring it back to somebody else.
No, you're right. Three Dog Night and Larry Eigner. Phil, I'm going to turn to Manadana and Magdelena, but first tell us what the temperature is outside in Texas today.
Well, we are expecting a high near 95 with great humidity because it's all coming up from the Gulf today, so it's just like Houston today. It's awful.
All right, well, stay in the air conditioning. Thank you for calling, Phil. Have a great day.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Webcast already.
Take care, man. Bye-bye. The number is 610-616-3208. So Manadana and Magdelena, let's try to understand that brilliant, precise, imagistic description of nature. How does it work, Manadana? Phil gave us a nice start on that.
Well, part of the thing about this poem that I love so much is that it is visual as much as it is verbal. And I was thinking of, it's William Carlos Williams, the No Ideas But in Things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only one pronoun that he throws in at the end, but it is all about the things and very simple things over a sense of narration or clarity.
Mm.
It's this inexactitude is actually a way of letting all of us into the poem.
Mm. And what do you think about something, a river over something? A poet that's being that precise usually won't settle for something.
And then right below it is some stones.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when you said imagism, but as much as it might have some imagistic parameters to it, he's not letting it be an imagistic poem.
Not at all.
Not at all. So I think that if he's painting a picture, you see kind of the sharp line of the tree, but you might not see all the leaves. And that's kind of a profound thing when you think about how hard it is for him to have put all this stuff on paper and to make it look as well as sound like what it is.
That's a really smart observation you made a minute ago about how this might seem to be imagistic and concrete and precise, but actually Larry Eigner is not interested in that. He sometimes will write a poem in which the nature he can see from his window, from his room in his building, will get in there very precisely. But this is more of a kind of dream. Like Phil was saying, there's a certain exhaustion, a playing out of the role of the poet here, a disabled poet who works hard at getting things across. And then there's this dream, just give me a river over something. Like, it's a kind of generic dream, grass and some stones. In other words, I want to go to some place where, and it's not precise. It's got this idealistic.
That makes a lot of sense with what you just said. You just use the phrase to get something across.
Yeah, something.
Right?
Yeah.
And what's happening here is we have this river over something.
Over something.
The imprecision is actually being enacted in the imprecision of the language.
It's super precise because the idea that a river can be flowing over something, well, typically, of course, river will flow. We're not talking about a river flowing over a highway underneath. It's usually the other way around, right? So this is a river that flows over grass or stones, right? So,
Al?
Yeah.
Can I interject something from what you said a lot earlier?
Yeah.
If we're looking at Eigner as also a disabled poet, he may not have seen a lot of rivers and he certainly didn't walk over stones. So this, in a sense, is this, as you put it, this idealistic dream of something that he may never get to, but he imagines being there.
Yes. Magdelena, let's finish our conversation about this poem with the last line, which we talked about a little bit earlier. I want to continue. It's such a giant thing to say at the end of a short poem. Can you try to just translate it? Just paraphrase it in several different ways? Just riff? What does it mean?
Well, for me, it means that I think into the conversation is about
I think Magdalena's
stopping.
your connection is a little slow, Magdalena.
Maybe stop.
Magdalena, just so you know, your connection is slow, so we're not really hearing what you're saying.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. I'm kind of feeling here is this desire to continue the relationship, the conversation, that even he needs to stop for a moment, maybe to rest or to like focus on something. There is this flow that the conversation is going to continue.
Lily, what do you make of this? I want to continue.
You know, it's
something about this
Okay, Magdalena, your connection is tough, so we're not really able to hear what you said. So, Lily, you want to?
Yeah, he gives us a few different possible, like, in poem meanings of what continue could be. Like, it could be the conversation, it could be the friendship. Like, sorry, I turned silent. I want to continue our friendship.
Right.
It could be a conversation. You know, like, I want to continue the conversation. It's kind of a common phrase. He gives us a river, and so we can't help but think of rivers and continue, you know, this sort of trite thing of like, you can't step in the same river twice, whatever, like it's continuing to flow. And then also, of course, like we talked about before, it's the end of the poem. So it could be, I want to continue, but I can't, or I want to continue, but I'm out of ink. You know, it could be many different things.
Right. What I'd like to do now is ask everyone, including Claire, everyone, to say something very brief about that powerful last line, and then we'll go on to our next poem. So let's start with Irene. Something, just anything brief about what I want to continue means to you when you get to it.
For me, it's an intention. It's like a desire. It's a correct intention.
Yeah. In a Samuel Beckett sort of way, you know, I can't go on, so I'll go on. And that's very...
I start by saying sorry, talking about silence, and no, I want to continue.
Yeah,
so
I'm ready. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. It shows a tremendous spirit, it seems to me. Jeremy, quick thought on the last line. Jeremy Dixon, thought on the last line?
I think he's still muted.
I think you're muted, Jeremy. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, still getting used to all this.
Sorry.
I think it relates to the poem continuing as well. It's like the poem is the flow. It's not just the poet. It's the words on the page. So it's almost like the poem saying, you know, I'm flowing. I'm going to carry on. There's more for me to say.
Yes, that's beautifully put. I take it as heroic. I have the 4-volume Larry Eigner, all the poems they could find, and they're reproduced in this non-proportional font. It's a Courier font. And just like a typewriter, although it's not exactly holograph or anything. And there's so much space around the poems. And I Want to Continue suggests, there's 2,000 more poems in these 4 volumes. So this is like a meta poem in the sense of I'm clearing my throat, taking a little break, failing to communicate, but I'm ready to go on, read the other 1,000 poems. Thank you, Jeremy. Kelly, a quick thought on I Want to Continue?
I think I have like two thoughts. One of them is sort of like he was naming like a river over and then grass and some stones, grass and some stones is almost like I want to continue to talk about, to list more things or point out or name more things and continue that sort of imaginary landscape. And then the other thing is, I think for me the fact that I was used for the first time in the poem, there almost seems like the I wants to continue to exist and to continue into being.
Terrific. Mandana, final thought on this?
She needs to unmute.
Mandana, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. I was about to say, unfortunately, I don't hear anyone else, so hopefully I'm not repeating anyone. I'm perhaps most taken with both the use of a pronoun and a verb. The fact that he's naming himself finally within this poem, which heretofore really doesn't have a person. And the want is a very powerful word. That sort of human desire that, again, is nowhere near this poem up to that point.
Terrific. Thank you. Magdelena, what's your thought on the last line? Let's give it a try.
Let's try. For me, patient to it's like opens. For me, it's like poetry doesn't sensation, but just opens it up, and it opens creativity.
Yes, it's another one of those Thank you. It's another one of those ModPo poems that doesn't really want to end. It is open-ended. Ray Maxwell, final thought on I Want to Continue?
I think it's a very humanistic need to not want to stop, to want to continue. And the question that I wrote in the margin is, does he want to continue this conversation? Does he want to continue this life? Does he want a continuation just in general? And I think that the final option is the one that as human beings, we want things to go on and on and on and on.
Yes, very well put. Claire, your thought on this line?
I definitely read it, especially knowing his disability, that he wants to continue despite his struggles. And in comparison to the lines, like a river over something, grass and some stones, like the river flows despite what's underneath it, despite the obstacles. So I read it as I want to continue despite what is challenging me.
Yeah, that's great. If we divided the poem into two, which is the halting, hesitation, the sorry that can't quite get typed out, and then following that, the flow and continuation with the river, so that he's like centered by the nature and he's ready to flow like a river rather than the guy who has just one finger to use on a typewriter. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of transcendence is an unfair word to use in the case of disability. That's not the word. But working the quirk, I guess, would be a way to think about it. Figuring out how to make flow from this limitation. Anna?
I keep thinking about I want to continue in relation to the sorry, whether we read that as a title or as a first line, because I'm thinking about the ways that so often people who have disabilities or face challenges, whatever it is, whether you have like a food allergy limitation or a mobility disability, so often feel the need to apologize for their bodies and so often feel the need to say, I'm sorry, I need to use a ramp, or I'm sorry, I can't eat this food, or like whatever it is. And this wanting to continue is such a way to end that. It's like, I'm sorry, but I'm actually not apologizing for myself. I want to continue.
Right.
You're going to keep reading this poem and you're going to read the next poem in my 4,000 volume or poem volume.
No, you're totally right about that. That's great. Lily?
Well, I talked a lot about continue earlier, but I like the idea of it as just a stop and collecting point at the end of the poem for all the various things that could be continuing.
Yeah. Good. Let's give ourselves snaps for having done such a great job on this. And that was a little pause so that later Zach can edit. As we turn to our next poem, and we've got Ray for another 15 minutes, so let's turn to Harlem Renaissance poet. I know that Ray's been, especially in earlier years, really focused on relearning the Harlem Renaissance and has helped us over the years focus on the options of Harlem Renaissance poetry in ModPo. And so I'm glad he's here for this Ann Spencer poem. It's been in ModPo Plus for a few years, but we haven't focused on it much. So I'll read the poem, and we'll start with Ray and Irene. Just give us a first reaction to this marvelous little poem. What I will say about Ann Spencer is that her poems, she was sort of a really important, I almost want to say matriarchal presence in the Harlem Renaissance. She was older than a lot of the younger poets, and she was the one they went to. She had a vast garden. I think in Virginia. I should probably know the biography better. She had a vast garden. She was famous for what she grew in that garden. And people like Langston Hughes would make pilgrimages to talk to Ms. Spencer and get wisdom from them. And she didn't typically write directly about race. She was a poet who said, I, as a black poet, in this era of relative freedom in modernism, I can write about whatever I damn please. And so in this poem, she writes, seemingly, it's about her garden. So I'll read it, and then we'll turn to Ray and Irene. Earth, I thank you for the pleasure of your language. You've had a hard time bringing it to me from the ground to grunt through the noun, to all the way feeling, seeing, smelling, touching, awareness. I am here. Wow. Okay, Ray, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think the very beginning, I thank you for the pleasure of your language, brings to my mind the oral tradition, speaking, memorizing, even rhyming, in places where the oral tradition is preserved in religious scripture and prayer. And I think that's what she's starting us with, is that early level of knowledge transmission through the oral tradition.
And there's that, Ray, that little switcheroo at the end when we get the prayer rhetoric and prayer diction. Earth, I thank you. It's as if we're gathered around before a meal and we've had the stuff from the garden.
That's
and
right.
We're just thanking the earth for giving us this stuff. But the little switcheroo, the little curveball is for the pleasure of your, not just your fruits, your radishes, your rocket. Lily, you growing some rocket?
I am.
Yeah.
Arugula.
Arugula. But the pleasure for your language. And then we get a bit of an extended metaphor, an extended conceit, because it's not just the soil being made to give stuff up to us, but it's how hard it was to get the noun out and so forth. What do you make of that little curveball? It's a meta poem in a way, right? Not just a garden poem.
It is a meta poem, and I think the curveball that goes from the oral tradition to the noun is language bursting through from the spoken word to the written word.
There you go.
Ray, you're a genius. You're a fucking genius. That was great. Can you say that again?
I can.
No, I don't mean word for word, but in another way. I think that's really, really great. What a reading.
Well, I do this in my Library of Congress tour every month when we talk about the evolution of the book, and basically humans started off without an oral language, without just the ability to stack stones on one another. Then they developed an oral language, which enabled them to pass information by word of mouth, but they could only pass so much information by word of mouth, and in fact, it was just gossip. Eventually, the oral tradition works its way through, breaking through the ground, as Ann Spencer says, to grunt oral tradition through the noun. The noun, I'm saying, is the written language, the written tradition, which became the springboard for Western civilization, if you will.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Ray. So, Irene, what are your first thoughts about this poem?
Well, okay, so I was thinking more on this earth, I thank you part, because it's like, yeah, language is a human thing, but it's something from the earth, which is actually like growing up from the earth somehow. So it could be a way to say that language doesn't belong to a group of people or to a certain group of people, that it belongs to everybody equally, because it comes from the earth. And both oral language or, yeah, as I say, like oral or written, the noun or the verb are somehow both equally important, both are in the poem. And I really like the way in which she gets to the noun, to the final noun after all these verbs like feeling, seeing, smelling, touching, and the final noun that is finally appearing there is awareness.
Yes,
And
that's a
so-
noun. Irene, that's great. So you get these fake nouns, right? Feeling, seeing, smelling. They're nouns, but they have that ing thing that's sort of like so we're grunting through to the noun by having all these verb nouns, and then we get a real NESS noun. We got it. So ooh, I just hit my nose on the mic. Too much excitement. And so now what we're getting is this. We're the earth is giving, the poem is the earth that gives forth to a noun, a thing. And of course, that thing is hardly concrete. It's awareness. And then she gets to say, as Ray Armentrout does in The Way, I am here.
Yeah.
That's a great reading. Irene, you guys, where do we go from here? All right. So, Kelly, what's your general thought about this poem? And what was your first reaction to it? It seemed kind of simple at first, didn't it?
Yeah, I think the word that I keep coming back to is awareness, because I think my first impression of what awareness is obviously like the sensory, like being aware of where I am, or being aware of the surroundings, but also awareness as in contrast to like ignorance and not being aware of social conditions and in situations like that. And for me, that adds another layer to like the idea of struggling with language and yeah.
That's great. I wanted to quickly turn back to Ray because his lunch hour is almost over. And so I wanted to give you a chance, Ray, to say one more thing. But also before you do that, for people in the DC area, you do a tour at the Library of Congress once a month. You do some other things. Would you just shout out something that you're hosting or doing in the near future so people know about it?
There's nothing in the near future other than the monthly tour I do at the Library of Congress. It's on Saturday mornings at 10:30 and 11:30. If you're in DC, please come.
Great.
I just finished the third running of the August Wilson American Century Cycle. And because I've kept 3 sets of lesson plans and daily blog posts, I'm thinking about pulling together a layman's guide to understanding the plays of August Wilson, just because so much that's out there is so academic and not really geared towards every man. And so poetic.
Thank you for doing all that, Ray.
So that's how I have fun. I also have a job, and and the job is pretty occupying. But let's get back to the poem.
Okay, I have a question for you about the poem, though. Is it all right if I direct you?
Sure.
Okay, good. So I'm just curious. This poem appears in ModPo Plus under the Harlem Renaissance. Anne Spencer is known as a Harlem Renaissance poet. There are some poems in that grouping, such as Claude McKay's poem, which he claims was not about race, although I think all of us feel it is because it's about the race riots of 1919. In this poem, race is not an issue, but it's very tempting to read it as an allegory of the black poet. So I invite you to comment on that and focus particularly on the hard time that she has had, or that Earth has had, bringing the language, to me from the ground.
Yeah. Well, I've done some extra reading actually on Anne Spencer. I was hoping you would toss me this slow pitch so I could knock it over the fence.
I'm really good at that, Ray. It's my one talent, the slow pitch.
Yeah. Anne Spencer was very well known in these Harlem Renaissance circles. She was the elder stateswoman, and she was conscious of the fact that she was writing as a woman, as a feminist, in a world of men, albeit black men. She was also conscious of the fact that how can I say this delicately? many of the men with whom she corresponded, and I've actually read some of her correspondence because I'm here working in an archives. Many of the men that she corresponded with were not interested in her as a woman because they were gay, they were homosexual. And so she's I think that she, of course she's a Black woman and she's writing to reflect that background, but she's also writing as a woman in a male-dominated world, and she's writing as a woman poet in a poetry community dominated by men who didn't care about her because of her femininity.
Thank you, Ray, and thanks for joining us today, and have fun getting back to work. So what I'd like to do is go around and invite everybody to say one thing about this poem, the Anne Spencer poem, that you feel hasn't been said before. And when we get to Claire, I would like you to quote the tweets or posts. So let's go to Manadana next. Final thought on this poem. Even if it's just, I really like it, that would be good enough.
I'm just going to point one thing that I noticed is that in the third to last line, when she is talking about all of those different kinds of verb nouns, there's one that's missing, which is hearing. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer for that, but I find it very interesting because she's very specific about her language throughout. So I have to wonder why she's omitting that.
Yeah. It is interesting. There are 5 senses. And of course, if Ray's right that the oral tradition is behind this, then missing hearing is kind of significant. Jeremy, your thought on this poem? Had you read it before? I don't think you probably have. And you're muted, by the way.
Hi, yeah. No, I haven't read it before, and I didn't know about Anne Spencer before, so it's a really great opportunity to learn a bit more. She sounds an amazing woman, and all the photos you see of her online seem to be of her in a garden surrounded by flowers.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. I just have to say, I love that line, to grunt through the noun. That just it seems to beamed out from outer space into this very kind of calm poem. And the fact that through is spelled THRU,
Yeah.
That's the only kind of abbreviation in the whole poem.
Yes.
And it seems to turn the poem for me.
Yeah. Now, I think those are 2 good observations. She's thought of as a more traditional poet, as a matter of diction and word choice, than the Harlem Renaissance poets who were really going in for modernism. And yet we have this kind of informality of the through, and then we have the meta-poetic quality. She's really doing something fairly daring and experimental here. Anna, your thought on this poem?
Yeah, I think I, like everyone else, is stuck on grunt through the noun as a really just amazing line. And I think it calls attention to the labor involved in making poems and writing poems and speaking.
And gardening.
Yeah. You've had a hard time bringing it to me from the ground to grunt through the noun. Like there's just like that string of active verbs right after that line. This is about labor. This is about like the intensive amount of work it takes to tend a garden and make a language and speak it.
Yes. I'm gonna overread what you just said. That is to say, I'm going to add to it and amp it up as a way of setting up Lily, who cares about gardens. So, if we wanted to deep read this, Lily, we would get to, there's a critique here of all that traditional poetry that just is so florid, and flowers abound, and the earth gives us everything we want, snap, snap. All those. And I have a feeling those poets didn't actually do the gardening. They were just wandering around smelling the roses that somebody else grew, I mean, I don't want to blame Frost for everything, but his nature is kind of ready-made, he didn't really, and he was sort of a gentleman farmer.
Nice place.
He didn't really, no, New England was pretty hard Scrabble, but he didn't actually do the farming. He just sort of, I'm being a little hard on Frost, but he sort of pretended to be the farmer poet so he could take a stance. And not to mention all of the poetry in, let's just say, the male lyric nature poetry tradition is all about everything that the earth just abounds. It's enslaved to us, that earth, and it just does whatever we want it to do poetically. And I think Anne Spencer is reversing that. and saying something like, you know, this relationship that I have with you, a relationship of labor. Indeed, in the tradition, Anne Spencer would be old enough to have a sense of this, enslaved labor, bringing things forward. It's been a very, very difficult time, right? So everything I get from the ground, I bless. I thank you for it. How is that? Is that too much of a read?
No, I don't think so. But I'm going to also add a bit to what Ray was saying about an evolution of language and communication. Like, I think in Anne Spencer's model, Earth and human are evolving together, and they've finally reached a point where there's pleasure in language, because she's not just saying, I'm thanking you for language, I'm thanking you for the pleasure of language. So it's not just now I can speak and whatever. It's like, okay, maybe first we only, like the word grunt points to a more sort of a primitive reading, right? Like first we could only grunt and point at nouns. Now we're evolving together. Like I've cultivated, pun intended, like a warm, loving relationship with you, and I'm now able to. I'm recognizing all the hard work it took for Earth as well as for human to get to this point, and now we can, because we've had that working relationship, we can get to this great place.
Yes, and I'm hearing Ray say that this is a feminist take on the Harlem Renaissance, and in fact, one could read this as a birth poem, a birthing poem. There's the grunting through all the way, awareness, I am here. There's a kind of revelation of identity, right? So it strikes me that the difficulty that she had here, we picked these poems randomly, but it's a sort of cousin poem to Eigner's difficulty, which is not a historical or racialized difficulty, but a disability difficulty. But that the kind of this is really tough. It's been tough. So the nature you find in my poem, it isn't incidental. It's sort of it embodies the difficulty that I have. I want to go on. I want to continue. I want to be. I am here. I want to continue. They're really together. Before we end this one, Anne is going to hold up, Zach, a photo we have here of Anne Spencer in her garden.
Look at her.
There she is. She's carrying some pretty great, looks like beans maybe?
Produce of some kind.
Zach's having some focus problems. He needs to learn. There it is. There's Anne Spencer.
Anne Spencer in her
What's
garden.
it say on that basket?
I'm not sure.
French? Come on, you need to do your French.
Sorry.
Claire, can you quote? We'll conclude with some quotes from the...
Yeah. Brian early on the forum said... He comments on the choice of the word grunt, and he says, we grunt through the nounness of our bodies, the dirty, sloppy reality of our bodies. There is so much beauty in taking earth and grunting through nouns to other nouns who are also aware we are grunting.
Beautifully done, Brian. Thank you.
There's a lot coming in, so I'm trying to find...
A lot? That's great. And Chris Foreman asks if there's a relationship between this poem and E.E. Cummings, I thank you, God, for this most amazing day. And I would say, Chris, that poem, the Cummings poem, was probably first, chronologically. So there may be an influence there. Go ahead, Claire.
Dina, I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, Perot says, to grunt through the noun, love it. Language is complex. Human expression has so much more to do with the senses, a more primitive language. And Sanjeev says, grunting through the earth, sprouting forth the many gifts of the earth, which the poet is aware of. If you are not aware of the many gifts of the earth, you will not sense, feel, smell, touch, ...
Nice.
Yeah, good stuff.
And then...
Stephanie says she likes it when you're hard on frost.
Yes.
Which Stephanie likes that? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. I really don't like to do that, but sorry. There's an ironic sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, not sorry. You're hard on frost.
Kate Boykin-Williams, her awareness and sense of being present, I am here, has come from her relationship to the earth through her gardening and the motions it makes her feel. The earth speaks to her through what pushes through, grunt through the ground she tends.
Kate, that's fantastic. I think that's the Kate in North Carolina. Yeah, I think
you
so.
might be right.
Yeah. Okay. Let us snap for the wonderful work that's been done on this poem. And there is the pause, because we're now going to turn to our last poem. We're
And
going
Lily's
to
gonna
Lily,
scoot out.
see you next time.
This was so fun.
This was so fun. Claire did a great job.
Yeah, Claire, nice to meet
Thank you. You
You're
too.
such a
We'll see you at the other end of the table.
Welcome to the fam.
Bye, Lily.
Okay. Yes, see you in Wales, Lily.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Okay, we are now turning to a Dickinson poem. Boy, did we really save this for last? Holy cow.
That was a
Okay.
mistake, 'cause we
So,
only have 20
yeah, we can do this.
20 minutes.
Right.
You're on the clock.
Yep. Okay, Zach, we may begin this segment after Animate That Snide Roar. We are now looking at a poem by Emily Dickinson. It's number 761 out of the 1700. It was written in about 1863. It was not really published until the 20th century. And it's a really hard poem. And so I'm going to read it, and I'm going to ask Jeremy, Irene, and Magdelena to start with anything you have to say about this really difficult Dickinson poem. And I'll also say to those who are intrepid about calling, 610-616-3208, we want you to call and talk to us about this poem by Emily Dickinson, 610-616-3208, and post to the forums and to Twitter. Here it is. Are we ready? Okay. From blank to blank, a threadless way, I pushed mechanic feet to stop or perish or advance, alike indifferent. If end I gained, it ends beyond indefinite disclosed. I shut my eyes and groped as well. 'Twas lighter to be blind. Holy
what
cow.
on God's green earth?
Okay, so I see everybody shaking their heads. Emily Dickinson, wow. She just keeps doing it. All right. Jeremy, Irene, and Magdelena. Jeremy, first, say anything to get us started. Jeremy, what's this poem about?
A journey, a trek. I'm kind of thinking of lost in the snow, in the Arctic, trudging.
Are you saying that an Emily Dickinson poem is actually about walking around?
Perhaps. It's about, to me, it seems like a kind of journey, the blank to blank, footsteps, the threadless way.
Yeah, that means
That kind of
a threadless way means a way without a path, a way without a trail.
Yeah, well, it's the labyrinth, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get out of the labyrinth by following the thread, and if there isn't
Yes.
a thread, you're lost.
That's right.
So,
And mechanic feet would be either I'm really so tired, I'm just putting one foot in front of the other, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm not really paying attention to the walking. Or metapoem, or
yes,
Or-
the actual feet of the poem.
yeah,
itself,
yeah.
which,
From blank to blank, a threadless way. I pushed mechanic feet. Da 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 da. Isn't the pushing of mechanic feet possibly a reference to the poem itself, at least the way it begins metrically?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
you know, Al picked this poem, so it's going to be a meta poem. All right, this is
Yeah.
a great start. Irene,
Al, we
you're
do-
on.
We have someone on the phone too, just so you know.
Irene, hold that thought for 1 second. We're going to take someone from the phone. Who's on the phone, Chris Martin?
Al, we have John Knight calling in.
John Knight. He returns.
Yay.
Hi, John. How are you? Yeah, you're a little quiet.
I'm fine.
Good. What do you think of this Dickinson poem?
I love it.
It's really great.
It seems to me to have holding two thoughts at the same time.
Yep.
She's at once depressed and at the same time transcending.
Let's talk about the depressed part first. What's your evidence for that?
Well, just blank to blank, just boredom. I'm walking mechanically. I'm just taking the steps that I have to
Yeah.
take. It doesn't matter whether I stop or I perish or I dance.
Yes.
It's all indifferent.
Yes.
I don't have any value there. I'm just
Right.
doing.
Right. Or to put it another way, I'm not getting anywhere.
Right.
Right. And then?
But on the other hand, I understand that wherever I get it, it doesn't matter. And if I shut my eyes, I can do as well.
Yes.
And the idea of being, it doesn't matter whether I'm seeing or I'm blind. It might even be better if I'm blind because then I won't have an expectation.
Yes. John, that's
so
so good. Yes. So this is a classic Dickinson moment. She's saying, like, if I were living in a world where I had goals and outcomes and paths and trails and places to go to and traditional ambitions, then that's a kind of depressing thing. I would just kind of trudge through life. However, I have the imagination. And so I actually don't want to get to an end. That's the bad thing. So I'm going to be more than okay not having an end to get to.
Can I push it even further than that?
Yes.
I mean, metrically speaking, right? Isn't to just go from your argument about metrical feet or mechanical feet, as she says, it's better for me to work outside of those constraints.
Yeah.
My poem can do more working to break out of the metrical patterns that are sort of established.
Right. Irene, we're going to turn to you now. John, do you want to stay on the line for a minute? That was great. Maybe we'll give you another. Okay, great. Okay, so Irene, we get this image of the poet deciding, I don't want to do the traditional thing. I really want to try something that I know nothing about, where I'm blind. I don't even know where I am. Like, let's say I'm a Spanish language poet and I decide to move to Paris. Like, that is a counterintuitive thing. And you're lost. You think, like, where am I? What is the poet to do? Did I decide to, in a sense, to try exile as a way of returning to my language? Sorry to load that up with a personal interpretation, but the point is, the poet needs to not know where she's going in order to be, like, doing the thing. What do you think of all this?
Yeah, I totally agree about. And I was thinking also about this Dickinsonian idea about possibility, and it's like, yeah, what she's suggesting with all of this, even with the words and the ambiguity of the poem, is all this possibility that can open in a world where there are no rules or no metric or where anything is defined. So you can explore.
Yeah.
So I would talk about possibility.
So I would like to ask Magdelena and Kelly to explain the phrase indefinite disclosed. Indefinite disclosed. Magdelena, do you want to try that? Magdelena, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so what do you think of this phrase, indefinite disclosed? What does that mean?
I think I'm words because there's so much like it's so definitely closed, also something which is like opened or something which
Right, disclosed means revealed.
It's something beyond manageable even.
Right.
So by putting those two words together, in some way not comprehensible, but again it opens to the amazing abilities of our mind or imagination.
Yes, very well said. Kelly, in the world of Kelly Writer's House, in the world of the kind of poetry we admire around here, in the world of ModPo, indefinite is a positive thing. And in a funny way, definite is not a positive thing. So what's so great about indefinite? And moreover, once you say what's so great about indefinite, then the question is what's so great about disclosing the indefinite, which seems like a paradox.
Yeah, I think what's so great about the indefinite is that it's because you're not making this one specific decision. It's an open possibility, like an open field of possibility. And so you can have many, many different like options there, and you're not set to one thing.
Yeah.
And then the disclose part, for me, I can't help but connect the disclosure to the blank to blank, because when I read that first line, it's almost like a word was substituted by the blank, like fill in this blank that wasn't there before. So in disclosure, there might be, like, in making a certain choice, there's another thing to be gained there, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you made me think about the way a mechanical poet, someone who is committed to a meter before the content, does a poem. Shelley used to do this, actually. They would write from blank to blank to blank to blank to blank and blank. They would just put the word blank in to stand in for a monosyllable.
Right.
It becomes a cipher. And she seems to be deliberately doing that. But to disclose indefiniteness is actually to turn blank around from being an empty, crappy cipher into being the most important thing. Blindness, groping, indefiniteness, blankness. That's her ideal state, it turns out. Mandana, your thought on this, and then we will wrap up with a few other readings here, and maybe Claire can quote. Terry Reef has a little... so we'll work through that. Mandana, your thought?
Sure. Any specific thought or...
No, generally. I mean, you've read a lot of Dickinson by now.
I love this
This is a
poem.
good
I
one,
love
isn't
this
it?
poem. For one thing, there's so many dualities in this that it keeps your interest in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I especially love that line of threadless way, this idea of being in the labyrinth and not having a way to get back. And yet she always does get back to an ending that works. Also with that last line, I had a feeling about, telling it slant, that not seeing something directly is the best pathway to actually be able to see something at all.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's the relationship between, I mean, given what John Knight said earlier, there's a relationship, and also Jeremy, who started us off talking about wandering around, relationship between this kind of wandering and the discovery that John Ashbery makes in Just Walking Around, which is that the best thing to do is not to plan a trip, but just to walk around and discover that life, that poetry is really about not going somewhere definite, but doing the going. Okay, I want to turn to John Knight. I wanted to turn back to you. Any thoughts further on this discussion?
Yes, sure. First off, for me, indefinite disclosed means comfortable with ambiguity.
Right.
And what's lighter to be blind is that before she understood that, it was simple. Life was simpler. So to me, the idea is the whole poem is she's holding two states of mind at the same time. Right. And now that she understands that she's holding two states of mind at the same time, and she's accepting ambiguity, that's what the whole poem's about.
John, you're really good at this. You really, really are. Don't ever leave us, please. I also think, John, that this is a voluntary disability. She shuts her eyes. That's a very weird phrase to use, and I didn't quite mean it that way. But I think that Emily Dickinson is saying, if I want to try on not knowing where I'm going, right, I will shut my eyes and grope. So you get, if this were like a little cartoon, it would be Dickinson trudging through a kind of standard poetry and then deciding to get lost, right, and to shut her eyes and grope around, right, and then experience the paradox that John describes of having two thoughts, like this gets lighter. To close your eyes and grope means I see better, right? I mean, this is so a devotion, this poem, isn't it? We got to bring this up to Frost Valley this summer.
It's going by feel, right? As opposed to by slotting in by blank to blank.
Going by feel, exactly. Very well put. John, thank you for calling. Really great to hear your voice. Thank you. Claire, what do we have in the feed? And then we'll wrap up this poem.
Well, Terry Rife said something interesting. It's interesting to look at Emily Dickinson's original manuscript for this poem on the Emily Dickinson archive. She makes notes of these two alternatives rather than course, or using course instead of way.
Okay, so it would be a threadless course.
Yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And using reached instead of gained.
Jeremy's got it too.
There it is.
There it is. Wow.
Wait, Jeremy, make some noise so that the video comes to you.
Hello, there it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so Claire just, by way of Terry, just told us that we've got, what is it? The second
course
substitution?
rather than way.
Yeah, you can see
and
it
Way,
crossed
a
out.
threadless course. Yes, go
and
ahead.
reached rather than gained. So
Where is
if
where is
and I
gained?
reached.
I'm not seeing
If
gained.
and I gained. So if and I
If
reached.
and I reached. Okay, well, that sets up the groping
Yeah.
pretty well, although it's subtle of her to end up with gained.
Mm.
Thank you, Terry. Anything else?
Also from Terry, the lighter at the end could be used rather than more illuminated and lighter like that. Also less burdensome, so like a
Yeah.
lighter load.
Yes,
That's
So the
really
duality
great.
of that.
really good.
And then there was another one that I wanted
Alana
to
said
say.
something about indefinite disclosed
Yes.
on Twitter.
Yeah.
What isn't concrete takes form when disclosed.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So Alana's totally right. This is similar to what happens in the Anne Spencer poem. There's I'm sorry, in the Eigner poem when he says a river over something rather than something very specific, right? So the greater the specificity in a way, the less that gets disclosed. It's paradoxical. Very nice. Good. Okay, Anna, final thought on Emily Dickinson?
If end I gained, it ends beyond indefinite disclosed.
Pretty
Is like
amazing writing.
That's an all-time Emily Dickinson flex.
Yes.
That's.
Can you paraphrase? If end I gained, it ends beyond?
I think to me that means, I mean, if we're talking about this idea of you can't plan your life, you can't plan your poem, you have to just let the poem kind of take you where it's going to go.
So end means objective, ambition, career goal.
Yeah.
If I had a career goal, go ahead.
Well, how often do you like get to a goal and like realize you want more?
It ends beyond, meaning it beckons forward.
Right.
I
want to continue.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's really quite a writer. All right, well, let's give ourselves snaps for doing a great job on this Dickinson poem. You know, I don't see the Warsaw people snapping.
Shout out to everyone who was in the Twitter feed. My God,
This was great.
It was going crazy.
Firing today.
So a couple of final words. So we've made 3 ModPo Plus videos, which I think Zach shouldn't be the worst thing editing them, although we probably should take the Ray's plugging Library of Congress out of there. Sorry, I didn't realize that. I was in webcast mode.
Ray can say whatever
We
you want.
also, I think, proved that having the community TAs join us is just such a worthwhile thing. Thank you. I'm going to thank you individually in a second. Before we say goodbye to everybody, I just want to do a D-Day shout out. That's the wrong way of putting it, right? This is the 75th year commemoration of the invasion of Normandy, which meant that finally the Americans and the British and the Free French, who'd been isolated from their country, were able to get into France and begin to push toward Germany to defeat the Nazis. This was a critical moment. In 1943, the Allied armies had gotten into North Africa and started into Italy, but this was the second front that they needed, actually a third front if you include the Soviets in the east. This was the day, 75 years ago. It's a little hard for Americans now because we are properly anti-war, I think in almost every instance, to imagine cheering on this essentially voluntary slaughter of thousands of people landing on a beach with rifles, not even repeater rifles in a lot of ways. It was a very crazy thing to do. My father was in the Navy, so he was not, fortunately, at Normandy. He was in the Pacific. But why did he go to war as young as he was? He went to war because we hadn't gotten any mail back from the Jewish family in Warsaw. We didn't know what was happening with them. We'd heard reports. So my father and my uncle signed up and we need to defeat fascism. And that's what they did. George Oppen, a great poet, was not in the first wave of Normandy, but in the second wave, and wound up fighting in the Battle of the Bulge. And he wrote a poem, which I'm going to read in honor of all of the poets and non-poets who didn't really know what the great plan was, but knew that they needed to defeat fascism and anti-Semitism and racism and hatred. And it's called Survival Infantry. It was written by George Oppen a few years after the war. And here it is. And the world changed. There had been trees and people, sidewalks and roads. There were fish in the sea. Where did all the rocks come from? And the smell of explosives, iron standing in mud. We crawled everywhere on the ground without seeing the earth again. We were ashamed of our half-life and our misery. We saw that everything had died. And the letters came, people who addressed us through our lives. They left us gasping and in tears in the same mud in the terrible ground. That's George Oppen, and the poem is called Survival Infantry. And here's to the 95-year-olds, because if you were 20 on D-Day invading and you survived it, you're 95 today. So thank you, Jeremy Dickinson, for hanging out with us. You're the best. Thank you so much. Irene, thank you for joining us, and thank you again for being a host when we were in Paris. And you're going to stay on the line, right? Because we're going to do a little poem with you. Manadana, thank you as always. How are you doing there? Did you like this? I think you're muted.
Loved it.
You
No,
loved it.
sorry.
Yeah.
I loved it. I would do this anytime.
Okay, that might happen. Kelly, thank you for taking time out during your Florence visit.
Thank you.
Yeah, have fun. Is this a pen program or something else?
No, I'm just here.
You're just doing it. Okay, have fun.
Yeah.
Say hi to Brunelleschi for me. Good man, that Brunelleschi. Magdelena, thank you so much for coming to us all the way from Warsaw.
Thank you. And if you also celebrated the 30 years of first free elections in Poland, and I think Whites also had a big role in the fall. So just made me think of that, Al.
Yes, and in fact, in 79 when Lech Walesa ran. Was it 79 or 79, right?
That's, well.
Or is it 89?
89.
89, yeah. Yeah, that was a great moment. Yeah, Magdalena and I have talked about our, all my people are Polish, and it's been a hard time. It's been a hard time. Claire, welcome to the ModPo family.
Thank
you
you
were
so
just
much.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Was she fantastic?
So great.
Or what? You are our intern. We're very excited.
So excited.
Anna, as always, thank you.
Can't get rid of me.
Chris and Zach, do you have a mic there? What do you think? How's the tech? Anything to tell the people at home about what happened?
Here you go, Zach.
Well, it was a learning process, that's for sure.
Okay, what did you learn?
We learned how things work.
Is it easier, I hope, after all this effort and
What
money?
do you think?
We learned how things don't work.
Okay. Well, I think you guys did pretty well. So snaps for these guys.
Thank you.
We are, in fact, going to be ready in September for ModPo 2019, and we're going to have this room is going to be so ready. So I hope everybody watching the webcast will come back on September 7th, which is a Saturday, for our 8th season of ModPo. So this is shaking your head. Like,
It's just
could it have been
wild.
8 years? So I hope everybody here who's watching, everybody who's participating, will join us on September 7th. And please tell your friends about ModPo. It's free, it's open, it's for everybody. So, all right, we'll see you later.
See you in
Thanks for
September.
tuning in. Bye-bye.